Good afternoon. I'm delighted to see you all, and I'm so grateful that you have joined us. I want to say first that this event is being recorded and will be made available on the Center for Medical Humanities website in the near future, in about a week. My name is Jim Lee, and I'm the center's director, and I'm so glad to welcome you to our second work in progress presentation. I want to thank the center staff for their excellent work in making today's and all of our events possible. Sam Carter, Joanne Jamora, and Amanda Swain. The Work in Progress series provides faculty and students from around campus the opportunity to showcase their research projects that engage with the intersection of medicine, arts, and the humanities. Before I turn this event over to Jonathan, I want to announce our final winter quarter event. On Thursday, March 4th at 4 p.m., we will continue our Open and Emergency Mental Health Series event featuring Shana Bulhan-Haydock, who will lead us in a workshop titled Crazy, Sick, Queer, Navigating Interpersonal Relationships. I hope you consider joining us for this event and sharing this event with others. Please stay tuned for announcements for some very exciting spring quarter activities and events that CMH is planning in the near future. Now, I'm so excited about today's event. Jonathan Alexander is Chancellor's Professor of English and Associate Dean in the Division of Undergraduate Education, the author, co-author, or editor of 16 books. Jonathan has primarily focused his scholarly work on written and digital production in the extracurriculum, such as self and collectively sponsored multimodal forms of composition, including fan texts. More recently, he has turned his attention to the many varied forms of life narrative as a rich mode of rhetorical and political engagement. He also experiments with writing life narrative, and his critical memoir, Creep, A Life, a Theory, an Apology, was a finalist for a Lambda Literary Award. This fall, he has two new critical memoirs coming out, The Story of an Abuse, the sequel to Creep, and Strokebook, The Diary of a Blind Spot, from which you will read today. Thank you, Jonathan, for giving us a first look sneak peek, and the floor is yours.
Jim, thank you so much. I really do appreciate the opportunity to present as part of the Medical Humanities Works in Progress series. I also wanted to thank Joanne and Sam for all of their help in setting this up. So I just want to make sure if everybody can hear me loud and clear. Excellent, thank you. What I want to do is, as Jim said, read a little bit from Strokebook, which actually is coming out in October from Fordham University Press. And this book, as you will hear, arose out of a health crisis in 2019 and is an attempt to kind of think through the ways in which I understood that crisis, in which I continue to understand it, and also in particular, the ways in which my own kind of subjecthood as a queer person is, for me, inextricably wound up in not only how I understand that crisis, but then also all of the ways in which that health crisis, I think, was made legible to me. So I'm going to begin with the first part of the book. And I guess I should start by saying that this book is for Mac McCoy for the obvious reasons and the less obvious as well. What does one do with time? Is there a more important question that is as difficult to answer? Of course there is, but this is the difficult question most present in my mind right now, the one about which my life seems to pivot. What do I do with time, especially when I am made aware not just of how little I might have, but of how it might disappear at any moment? His name is Victor, and he took my coffee order this morning. I'm pretty consistent, one petite vanilla bean scone and either a small coffee or a medium Americano. This has been my routine, but his name is a discovery, Victor. I've been watching him on workday mornings when I come to this coffee shop to get a coffee, a treat, sit with a book, and remain quiet for a few minutes. He doesn't work every morning, so it's always a nice surprise when I see him. This is the first time we've spoken, though. Once he did make my drink and put it on the bar, calling my name, but we didn't make eye contact, so I won't count that as an exchange. Today, though, when he was taking my order, asking if I wanted just one scone and any room in my coffee, I risked a joke about just a little room because it was always filled to the top, and that's likely a burn risk. A small chuckle diverted eyes. He doesn't know that I'm really trying to flirt. Victor, he's Latino on the shorter side, but not short, maybe a bit stocky. It's his khaki dickies I position myself to see, his plump butt filling the rough material, stretching it smooth. It's beautiful, perhaps more beautiful because he's not especially attractive, though hardly ugly. I'm cutting the differences here between absolutes. Pretty, ugly, fat, thin. I'm finding something absolutely beautiful, though, in the otherwise unremarkable. But I think Victor might be remarkable. Of course, I exaggerate. I can't not. But then, as I'm sitting down with my Paris reviews, straining my right eye to see the newly more difficult text, Victor takes the seat tour over from me, no one between us, pulling out his phone, going on break. We have no contact, but I feel him. I look askance, seeing the khaki-clad legs stretch out a bit, that plump butt settling into the seat. We won't talk. Maybe I want to. I don't know. Maybe I will try. I'm at the point, given the week I've had, of saying something. But really, I'm not going to engage this kid. There will be no engagement. He's become a part of my day, even if he doesn't know it. But that's it. He takes my order in the morning, and then there's this extra gift of him sitting down across from me. And in a way, this starts to feel like grace, a beneficence, something unexpected, a wrinkle in time, like my stroke earlier this week, something unexpected. There's a story here, obviously, in many ways to tell it. A little over a month since it's happened, and this is the version I choose to tell right now. I will have other versions, and the people around me will have their versions, and the people who hear secondhand will have their own versions as well. But this is the story I tell right now. About a month ago, Mac and I woke up in our B&B in Colorado, having spent a weekend looking at real estate and visiting with family and friends. We'd had a wonderful time, one of those times that felt like a turning point, a new chapter, an opening vista, all the cliche things you wonder if you'll ever feel after having gone through the cliches of a somewhat darker, less possible time. I call that time my 40s. We woke up, ready to pack our bags and head back to California. But something, as they say, as I said that morning, like I was following a script, something was wrong. I couldn't see out of the lower left-hand portion of my right eye. A curtain had been closed. A veil descended. A bit of the world grayed out. I spasmed around the room in my underwear, wondering what was going on, fearing a detaching retina. Mac wondered if we could fly home and have it treated there. And I said, no, absolutely not. This has to be seen to right away. Seen to. My failing sight must be seen to. Hours later, after multiple calls and instructions from our health insurance provider, we found ourselves in a medical office outside Denver. Pupil dilation, bright lights, eye-watering scans. And no, my retina was not detaching. Instead, the doctor could see a white spot at the back of my eye, which he surmised was a bit of plaque that had found its way from somewhere else in my body and lodged in a branch artery of my right eye's retina. The plaque was blocking blood flow to that part of the eye, causing what he called an occlusion. I'd had an eye stroke. My blood pressure was also extremely high. I'd been taking a prescribed diuretic in an attempt to control blood pressure and Zoloft in an attempt to control my stress. But this morning, my blood pressure was spiking. Of course it is. I'm going blind, I said. But the doctor wasn't amused. He sent me immediately to the emergency room of the local hospital. He was worried that the eye stroke, a bit of plaque blocking an artery, was the beginning of a much more substantial cerebral event, another bit of plaque blocking an artery in my brain. August 19, a Monday. That's the day. That's the day that I woke up with partial vision. That's the day I was admitted to the hospital. That's the day on which what we will come to call my incident happened. I guess technically the incident could have happened sometime on August 18th after I'd gone to sleep, but more likely August 19th as I was up late reading the previous night. Reading. Will I read again? Will I read out of that eye, my good eye? The question haunts me for days. Part of me doesn't want to know the answer. Part of me doesn't want to know the ensuing consequences if I can't read. My livelihood, English professor, depends upon reading. What happens if I can't? At the time, I couldn't say, but what I did know unequivocally was that August 19th is a turning point. There is now a clear before and a clearer after, or perhaps less clearer in some ways. August 19. I interrupt this message, this narration, because there are other things I want to tell you. There are other things I want to say. There are other things I want to talk about. In particular, I want to talk to you about the immense joy I have in telling you this story. I have to tell you now because this joy will pass. It passes. It passes understanding. No, I was not joyful when this was happening to me. Though I have to admit, I don't recall suffering either. More like limbo, unmoored, adrift. But in this moment, sitting at this desk, the sunlight behind me, an almond crunching in my mouth, the coffee in my cup getting colder, and I don't really care, I am joyful. I'm not so sure there's anything else I'd rather be doing. And I am joyful enough to not care that I'm lying when I say that. I must be. But at this moment, swallowing bits of masticated almond, I am delighted to be telling you this. So back to the hospital, skyrocketing blood pressure. At one point, 180 over 110. And the doctors decide to keep me overnight, running their various tests, CAT scan, blood work, ultrasounds, etc. I'm released the following day, the vision in my right eye still impaired, but I'm cleared to fly back home. I don't know how to feel throughout this. I'm relieved I'm being seen to, taken care of, tended by Mac, who is so good in an emergency. Friends start texting their concern and love. Mother calls me, worried. I feel comforted. And then I want to die. I wonder, half hoping, that this is it. This is done. The moment has finally arrived. We can stop now. Whatever this is, it can stop. I can stop. Karen, one of my oldest friends who lives in Colorado, drives 2 hours up to Denver to be with us that morning. She holds my hand. We joke with a neurology resident who comes to see me. The resident thinks we're married. Then Mac comes in, and the resident is completely confused. The three of us laugh, just like old times. I turn to Karen, who's still holding my hand. I say, too soon. This is just too soon. I sleep when Karen leaves. Then I wake up. Then I throw up, likely from the stress, the relief, the fear. I don't know what to feel about any of this. A case study. Patient is a 51-year-old man in reasonable health, 6 feet, 230 pounds, white, exercises regularly, no history of stroke or heart disease, some mild blood pressure, currently being treated with hydrochlorothiazide, a diuretic designed to help reduce the salt content of his blood and thus reduce blood pressure, not diabetic, not particularly high cholesterol, reports a moderate diet of mostly poultry, vegetables, and some red meat, including turkey and pork. Patient seems in reasonably good spirits despite what's happened, joking with nurses, doctors, and other hospital staff, mildly inappropriate, perhaps a good sign. Patient might begin wondering why this has happened to him, why, given his relatively low risk factors for an eye stroke, this incident has occurred, and what it means for his future. Patient is a gay man. This fact doesn't appear in any of the documentation, but I write it out anyway, as though a part of a case study. Back to the case study. At first, this will not seem a particularly relevant part of the story. No one of the various doctors the patient sees seems to care that his partner, the man who is accompanying him, asking questions, staying the night, is in fact a man, not a woman, a man. So it can likely easily be assumed that the patient is gay, though no one will ask if he is. It is not deemed relevant. There's at least someone there who can help take care of the patient once he's discharged. The sex of the individual no longer makes any difference, but perhaps it does secretly to someone who is helping the patient, someone who harbors inside homophobic thought or feeling, who internally disapproves but knows that this disapproval is no longer so widely shared that it can be assumed to be part of a communal value system. Too bad, but that's the way some things go. So whoever this person might be harboring a homophobic thought keeps quiet. They will not readily tip their hand, not right now, perhaps in the past, but not now. But positively, over and beyond these thoughts of bias and secret discrimination, the patient's sexuality doesn't particularly seem important. Other questions are asked: age, health, exercise regime, diet, medications, medical history, family history, married, yes, but the sex or gender of the spouse doesn't matter, not explicitly. Unless it does, the patient begins to think. Not immediately, but maybe it will. Maybe it will. And in fact, we speak too soon. Evening comes and the nursing staff changes. The large hunky nurse, Matt, is rotating off duty, and another one, a chunky woman, comes in to introduce herself. She updates the whiteboard with her information. She notices that Mac's name is not listed on the board. She asks his name and goes to write it on the board, marking down the word partner to describe his relationship to the patient. No, Mac says, I'm his husband. Okay, partner, she repeats. No, husband. She pauses. Thoughts twist her face. Okay, yes, I'm going to write husband. Mac doesn't thank her. He can't wait for her to get out. He's wondering if she didn't want to pay attention to him because he's Latino, part Native American. Whites don't always have to listen to those people. Perhaps she sees me and thinks, okay, I'll do this for the white guy. We'll never know. The patient watches all of this and doesn't seem to respond. He's already encountered enough shock today. This bit of haggling is just a bit too much, the icing on the cake that tips you into a diabetic coma. Best for him to ignore it. Otherwise, it will lodge in his mind, expanding, ballooning, inflicting the further damage that the tiny globule of cholesterol couldn't inflict because it got stopped in the patient's eye. Oh, but he'll feel about this later. He'll feel he should have spoken up. He'll feel, as the white man in the room, he should have said something. The patient is a gay man, a white gay man. It matters. It always matters. All right, that is the first part of the book. And what I think I might do is have just a couple more minutes. I told Jim that I would maybe read for about 15 or maybe 20 minutes at the most. I might switch gears and read from a passage just a slightly bit later. in the book, just to give you a sense of how things develop. And then I'm really eagerly looking forward to questions. Why do I marvel at the experience of care? Because I do. I always marvel at any experience of care. Some historical context might be useful here, but I'll keep this short. The past is with us enough already. I grew up in the deep south of Louisiana in New Orleans, which outsiders understand as a let the good times roll kind of place, but which is still in the deep south for those of us born and raised there. I went through puberty in the 1980s when AIDS seemed God's just punishment for the wicked. And by the time I started having sexual thoughts in the 1980s, I knew that I was very likely wicked, a homosexual, a faggot, queer. I believed more than anything, more than in the existence of God himself, that I would likely die of AIDS because that's what happens to the wicked. That's what happens to homosexuals. At least that's what you believed in the 1980s in the Deep South, in Reagan's America. God himself didn't need to exist for this truth to be inexorable. Everyone said so. My church, my school, my parents, my friends, our neighbors, our community, our president. You see, silence is always consent. Silence is always consent. Ronald Reagan didn't have to talk about AIDS for me to know that he fully approved of the widespread death of homosexuals. And there were many, so very fucking many, who weren't silent at all. They knew and delighted in saying what they knew. Homosexuals die of AIDS, slowly, painfully, unloved, unwanted, uncared for. So my psyche was trained from early on. The world hates you and those like you. So take any care you can get. Even this nurse in the hospital, the one who didn't at first want to list Mac as my husband, she's still caring for me. We can overlook her sins, Mac and I. After all, I'm still just queer, a faggot, a homosexual. And she's choosing to overlook that, or so it seems. At least I don't have AIDS. This is important. Some of us learn to live with anxiety. I'm not sure how to live without it. When most of your life is organized around flight, fight, or freeze, with an emphasis on flight or freeze, because, hey, those are less likely to result in you getting your ass kicked, well, then you don't know how to stop feeling anxious, even when you're not being directly threatened. When from earliest childhood, the bullies, my church, my school, my parents, my friends, our neighbors, our community, our president, when the bullies hate you, and even those, not the bullies, but those who say they love you, really don't approve of you, no, not at all, then you start to freeze inside. I might as well shift from the second person to the first. After all, I will have to learn to own this story. After all, I will have to learn to, quote, take it easy for my health. I'm not sure what else might shake loose in my body and try to kill me. So I will have to learn to be still, not so anxious all the time. Perhaps this too will be like freezing. Not everyone will understand this story, and not everyone should. And I'm actually glad for this. If you were born in a different time and place, perhaps later than I was, and more on an east or west coast, then you're not likely to know quite the anxiety that has become my constant companion, my most trusted friend, because I know he'll never desert me. And I'm glad for you, truly. I hope this is you. I heard a young queer writer, actor, and filmmaker recently talked about his coming out. He grew up in Jackson, Mississippi. So I initially thought that his story might be like mine, but no, he's so much younger. Times have changed, even in Jackson, Mississippi. Sure, not totally. His parents weren't happy. They sent him to a therapist, but not a reparative therapist, mind you, a legit therapist to help him cope with being gay. I'm glad about this, even as I resent it just a little bit. Not that he got help. No, that's totally okay. But that just a couple of decades earlier, my story seems so different, so fucking different. Different times, different places. Stories shape us, but always in time and space, which shape the stories. I cannot give you my space and time. I would not wish it on you, but I will tell you about it. I hope you won't fully understand it, not in your bones, in your quaking bones, where it counts. But I still feel the need. I still need to tell you about it. So finally, ultimately growing up in the Deep South in the 1980s, Reagan's America, the height of AIDS in America, the fear of dying from being homosexual, the fear of eternal damnation. This is the history that never leaves me. These are the times and the places that are never far from me. I would say this is the context that conditions my vision. These are the bits and pieces of my life that are rarely out of my sight. They are the bits and pieces that can become dislodged sometimes and want to kill me. They are there even when I don't see them. They are there even when they look just like a blind spot. Okay, I think I'll stop right there and invite questions, commentary,
Well,
reproach.
first off, let's show our appreciation and thank Jonathan for his reading, for giving us the opportunity to hear this early draft of his book. So thank you, Jonathan. This is the time when we engage with Jonathan. I invite you to use the chat and to, if you so feel so moved, to unmute yourself and use your mic to ask a question or provide a comment. I ask for some mic discipline so we are not all talking over one another. So I will scan if people want to raise their hands, either electronically or physically, but in the meantime, I'll just invite you to pose questions again, either in the chat or to unmute yourself.
Is that Amanda? Did she raise her hand? Yeah.
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you so much for reading that for us. And I actually have a question that I think is related, but I do follow you on Instagram and you've been sharing paintings. And I don't remember you sharing quite so many paintings earlier. And I'm wondering about the connection between the paintings and your stroke and your writing about your stroke. If there's what the relationship is between those experiences and the work that you're doing visually as well as writing.
Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate that question. So there's a way in which my turn to that kind of artwork, which is all watercolor and some oil-based pastel, but mostly watercolor with some collage, is largely a product of the pandemic and an attempt at self-care during the pandemic. Although I had begun doing a lot of collage with one of my dearest friends, Susan, a few years ago. And I actually talk a little bit later in the book about the collage practice and its relationship to the stroke, and how in the immediate aftermath of the health crisis, the incident, as I call it, I began doing even more work with collage, and then branched out into other media as well. I think implicit in your comment is why. what's the question? What's the connection between those things? And I think part of that has to do with, oh crap, I probably don't have as much time left to do everything I want to do, so I might as well try to do a whole lot of different things. I love art. I've always enjoyed art, and I just got to the point where I thought, why not? Why not actually engage in doing a little more visual art? And embrace some of the complexity of impaired vision by working in a visual medium. So I appreciate that question. There is a connection. It's complicated. I mean, everything is complicated by the pandemic, isn't it? So.
I see Radha's hand up. I just want to make sure that people who've asked questions in the chat also are heard, and I'm going to read them aloud for the sake of the recording. So Nancy says, thank you for this powerful reading. I'm interested in your use of time in your writing and how that represents your experience of time with respect to your stroke, but then and now.
A great question, and I always appreciate questions about time from historians because they feel like traps. But I know Nancy is not trying to entrap me. What I love about working with time in this particular book is that it really gave me an opportunity to work on how bits of the past are never far from my present. But so too is the pressure and very many different pressures of futurity. What I plan to do, what I want to do, what I desire to do with the future. And so any of you who have had a health crisis will absolutely understand you'll understand what I'm talking about when I say that what people tell you in the immediate aftermath of a health crisis is, oh, this is a wake-up call to live in the moment, right? To be present to yourself and to be present in the moment. And yes, that's certainly good advice. But what if you have had a traumatic past? And what if your health crisis is all about foreclosing on the future, on future possibilities? Then your sense of the present is never, ever not going to be impacted by the past or your ever shifting sense of the future. So for me, being in the present is grappling with the ongoing legacies of traumatic past, very likely a kind of set of traumas of homophobia that have contributed to stress and to ill health, while also trying to survive into the future with damaged body and damaged psyche. So, Nancy, does that make sense in terms of a grappling with time? The trick formally is to actually render that textually. And so one of the things that I regret about just reading this to you as opposed to showing it to you is that I've tried to arrange text and use different textual markers, italicization, some very short passages with longer passages, moving back and forth in time, even speculatively imagining the future as a way to try to textually, formally render that experience of time. So
yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Radha, would you like to go?
Well, thank you, Jonathan, with all my heart. That was a gift from you to all of us in the name of vulnerability, which is both specific as well as indeterminate. I'm so moved. Thank you. I hope you're well, and I hope you will live forever and write forever. Infinitude. A couple of questions and observations. I love the way that your perspective kept shifting, between queer and human and queer. Maybe not even death will provide the kind of equality that we are looking for. So say something more about what it meant for you, both in the experience as well as the writing about it, to have something like a perspective and have control rather than be controlled. The other question is, given an experience like this, would you ever resort to terminology like normal, the new normal, returning to the normal, or would you eschew that vocabulary altogether and say something like, all that life is has been no more than a chronic coping, has never been anything other than that? And yet we can't say that too fast, because to be able to say that, you need to have earned it with something called an experience, and all the problems thereof. But really a big hug and thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Radha. Much appreciated. So I could have read from a passage in a different part of the book in which I actually try to address the second question that you raise. My friend Karen, whom I mentioned in one passage, actually asked me just a few months ago, and I found myself writing about this in the book. She asked me, all right, it's been over a year. Do you find that your life has returned to normal? Which is the word that she used. Are things back to normal for you? Are you back at the point where, okay, the days seem like days. They're maybe not to be taken for granted, but maybe they're to be taken for granted. You have another day. And I found myself responding and writing about this from a very particular perspective, which is that what happened to me, that sort of bit of cholesterol coming loose and lodging in my eye, that's the kind of thing that will likely kill me. I have a sense now, unless I walk out of this office and I'm hit by a plane falling from the sky, God forbid, but I now have a sense, all things being equal, of how I will die. And it's a particular kind of death. It's the death that could strike at any time. So there's not a day that I don't think about this, but more than that, as I write in the book, there is not a night that I don't wake up in the middle of the night, usually between 2 and 3 in the morning, and look to see if I can still see, at least partially. So for the last going on 2 years, that is a daily, or in this case, nightly experience. And so I think the particular nature of the health crisis, the particular nature of the incident, and what it potentially tells me about the way in which I will die shapes a phenomenology for me of experience that has fundamentally altered how I understand and how I live my life on a daily basis. Is that getting at your question?
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
I just want to acknowledge the just immense outpouring of gratitude for your work, Jonathan. So I'm just going to name some names. So Radha, Mia, Amanda, Lilith, David, Raina, Serena, Megan. I mentioned Nancy earlier, Elizabeth, Tammy, Julia Lupton. Brenda Stephenson has a question. Thank you. I am always intrigued by hearing the patient experience of care, and especially when patients use this creative imagery for their diseases, almost befriending them. She uses the example, pieces of me trying to kill me. Was this just how you saw your illness, or a way to learn to deal with it?
Oh, probably both. I mean, the nice thing about being literary is there's nothing that's not a metaphor. So, what are the pieces trying to kill me? So in the book, the pieces become many things. They become bits and pieces, parts, but they also become, objects of meditation. They become the raw materiality by which I can begin to think through not only what has happened to me, how do I understand my past, how do I renegotiate my relationship with my past, and how do I renegotiate a relationship with whatever futurity I have left. So thank you for that. That's a great question.
Elizabeth writes, so great to see Jonathan, Julia, Susan, Steve, and so many UCI colleagues. Thinking about working with Jonathan on a graphic novel, we have had many discussions about thinking through a field of vision.
It's true, without a doubt. Is that Liz Losh?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That is. There is no, hey Liz, yeah, there's there's no doubt, and in fact, Liz and I were just starting to work on the 3rd edition of our comic book when shortly after I got back from Colorado and was trying to figure out what to do. And I remember having that conversation with her saying, I just need you to know this thing has happened. And it is sort of prompting me to see things a little bit differently. But I'm also grateful to Liz for, in those immediate months afterwards, giving me a very familiar project to work on and having an opportunity just to I can't say get back to normal, but to feel like, okay, there are things I can start to do, things I can start to do again. And somebody had mentioned earlier, I think maybe the individual who works in healthcare, oh no, Radha, you had mentioned, what is the new normal? The phrase that the nurses used and the neurologists used was, what is your new baseline? And I thought that was a more interesting phrase, the baseline, as opposed to normal. And because baseline seems to recognize that we're all in different, we all exist in different phenomenological worlds, right? We're all experiencing our worlds slightly differently. And I needed to accommodate to my new particular baseline. So.
Amy writes, I love your line. I still need to tell you about it, even after you've told us that you hope we don't understand it. And so your story will shape us whether we understand it or not. I think there's such a need to tell. And K2 asks, you're right. Well, she says, your writing is very moving. I love the connections with the past and present. And her question is, how do you cope with the trauma of waking up each night to make sure that you can see? That is so very difficult. In my language, Gujarati, we say, one's eyes are one's world.
It's a great question, and it disturbed me. I mean, is one's new baseline adaptation to trauma? You know, I don't know. We've all been through various traumas over the last year to varying degrees. I do wonder collectively what now. What is our new baseline? I don't know. I wake up, I squint out of that eye, I see grayish light coming through my window, and I think, okay, I can go back to sleep now. And I think I just allow that experience to happen. K2, I don't think I want to get used to that experience, if that makes sense.
Matthew writes, thanks for the reading, Jonathan. Could you talk a bit about what the practice of memoir does for you, both as a personal document and something that is made public? Was the experience of writing about a health crisis different than other memoir work?
Oh, that is a great question. You know, and I'll say that my turn to memoir, creative nonfiction, life writing is relatively recent in my life, and it does not stem from this particular incident. I started in earnest doing forms of life writing in 2016 for a variety of reasons. And we don't have time really fully to get into here. I think as a scholar, I have long been interested in how do people write as a rhetorician. I'm interested in how do people write their lives as a form of political work, you know, not just personal work, but I think especially as a queer man, as a queer rhetorician, I'm interested in the power of story to make visible, if not necessarily legible, the kinds of lives that otherwise will be dismissed or downgraded or destroyed. So I do believe there is power in storytelling, in particular kinds of storytelling, to make known, or if not known, at least more visible, the presence of different kinds of lives. There are always limitations, constantly limitations to how that works. Just last night, Mac and I were watching Supernova, which is a new film. It just came out. Was making the film circuits last fall. It's about an older gay couple played by Stanley Tucci and Colin Firth. And it is about one of the gay men in the couple developing dementia, and about his decision, spoiler alert, about his decision to commit suicide so that he doesn't have to live with the dementia and doesn't have to have his partner, his husband, take care of him in such a degraded state. And very moving, very powerful film. It's another film about dying queer people made by a straight man, written and directed by a straight man. It's another film about dying queers. I will write to you about what a dying queer's life is like. I will reserve the right to tell you about that. Having grown up at the time of AIDS, when it was very clear that this world thought, as many people still do, that the only good homosexual is a dead homosexual, I will tell you about what it's like to be a queer man dying. And I'd rather tell you that. So when I tell you I have more to tell you, even though I don't think you'll understand it, I still have to tell you. That's why I still have to tell you, because our culture is not yet over. It's not yet over its fascination with the dead homosexual. That's the story it still wants to tell. Now, granted, Supernova is a beautiful film, exquisitely well acted. And I think since it's no longer really au courant, it's no longer really correct to wish queer people dead. It says, well, the compensation was, we'll make it a beautiful death. We'll make it a gorgeous death, an aesthetically pleasing death. It's still death. So I will reserve the right to tell you about my own dying because I don't want somebody else to tell that story for me. This culture has told too many stories about queer people dying.
Rose writes, flight, fight, or freeze, very poignant, how daily life changes. I also love the passages on case study where an important aspect of who you are is made invisible. It's amazing how this part of who you are is an ongoing struggle. You are an amazing orator. David writes, how has your memoir process, experience, vulnerability, and disclosure changed from writing Creep to writing Strokebook? There's such different views of yourself at different ages, and I'm struck by your openness in exploring your feelings and biases now and in past moments. The vulnerability is piercing, and I treasure it.
It's very, very sweet. You know, I mean, again, I think this is probably tied to certainly my experience as a queer person and wanting a little more control over the kinds of stories that are told about queer people, and certainly the kinds of stories that I tell about myself. I've been thinking a lot about this, you know, as a scholar, you know, looking at other memoirs and other people who do live writing. I've been reading a lot of the work of Hervé Guibert, who French writer, who's probably most famous for writing To the Friend Who Did Not Save My Life. And Guibert died of AIDS in France. And To the Friend Who Did Not Save My Life is, you know, an amazing book. But most people talk about it, when they talk about it or they write about it, they talk about how Guibert actually in the book offers a portrait of the death of Michel Foucault, a philosopher who died of AIDS. And they also talk about the storyline in which Guibert is promised a supposed vaccine for AIDS that never comes to fruition. It's phantasmatic. You know, it's just a total fantasy. So that's what they talk about. And again, you know, here is a very powerful writer, a very powerful queer writer, writing about his own death. But when people talk about this book, they write primarily about the representation of Foucault, or the sort of dashed hopes of Guibert not getting a vaccine. But for me, the most amazing part of that book is right in the middle of it. And it's this strange story in which Guibert talks about having a friend who is a priest who's also dying of AIDS, a sort of pervy, really pervy priest. And this pervy priest really likes young guys. And so what Guibert decides to do is he gets a friend, you know, kind of a cute younger friend, and they take off all of their clothes and invite the priest over so the priest can ogle them. And it's fucking wonderful. And for me, that's the heart of that book. That's the single most important passage in that entire book. Not the portraiture of Foucault dying of AIDS, not Guibert's own dashed hopes, but the sort of persistence of a little bit of perversity, persistence of desire, having pleasure, joking. And so I realized in my own writing, whether it's in Creep or in this book or in other books that I work on, I have to be willing to risk talking about some of that, talking about some of my own perversity, some of my own pleasure, some of my own need to joke, because that's actually what makes talking about all of the rest of it worthwhile.
I'm going to assert director's prerogative and ask a question, Jonathan. So you say early on in the early part of your reading that August 19th was or is a turning point. And then you do a meditation of your capacity to read or not to read. And so I was really interested in the can read / can't read, or can see or can't see. And I wonder what you have learned about the space, the potential space between can and can't. Does it remain a dividing line of the either or is there a landscape between can and can't that you've discovered?
That's a very good question. There's, I don't, how do I respond? I am glad that I still can read, although I am much more easily fatigued as a reader. I am grateful that I have learned how to listen to books, which is not something I really could do before, but it feels important. It's certainly a way to help take some of the burden off of my eyes at times. So during the day or my lunch hour, I generally listen to books. So I'm glad to have that. I shocked Mac when I bought a Kindle from the Evil Empire and use it. But it helps. It actually helps quite a bit. When my eyes get tired at night, sometimes it is easier to read on a Kindle. You could certainly make it large enough to read. But these are all very practical solutions to what really is I don't want to call it an existential question. I get, what is it? What do I call the impending impossibility of reading? Because there's no other way for me to think about it. What do I call the moment when I really probably won't be able to read anymore? And then what do I make of a life that has been given over primarily to reading and to making texts? I don't know how to answer that, but I can tell you that my left leg is shaking as I talk about this.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think we have time for maybe one more question if anyone would like to ask.
Susan, I see Susan.
Yes, weigh in. Thank you so much, my friend. This was wonderful. I've been really looking forward to a preview of this work. And I've really enjoyed the discussion quite a bit. I noticed that you don't use the term disability. This is a comment or question that has a little bit to do maybe with Radha's intervention and the idea of norms. And so I guess I would like to say I both appreciate and then I'm curious about the your avoidance of this category of disability. And it also makes me think about intersectionality. I guess, you know, maybe I would anticipate my response, your response to this could be, my narrative is the evocation of the intersections of something like disability and queerness. But I just wonder if you have any, you know, and there are a lot of things that you didn't do that were very good, like talk about, you know, the visitation. I mean, you suggested a visitation of harm, you know, on you because of your being queer. But I wonder if you have any comments about disability and categories and intersections.
Yes, it's a great question to think about. I remember going to lunch with Jim not long after the event, and you know, it's a question we were talking about. You know, what is disability? And you know, I think one of the truisms of a lot of disability studies is, you know, we are all only ever temporarily able-bodied, if any of us are, you know, ever fully able-bodied. There's a way in which I consider myself disabled, but I consider that a sort of pragmatic choice to consider myself disabled, in that it allows me access to certain ways of thinking, certain ways of doing, certain ways of accommodating and of asking for accommodation. I think, and I'm hoping that the book makes this clear, I guess I don't really talk about being disabled because I've never not felt not damaged.
Mhm.
And so there's a way in which the stroke is just it's just another manifestation of damage, another extension of damage, another experience of damage. I don't know if that's satisfying.
Yeah, no, that's
got.
very interesting. The choice of the term for you people in medical humanities, maybe you have thoughts about this, but I think it's a very interesting term that brings together, you know, psychic and physical, social factors, you know, impacts in a really powerful way. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Susan. We are at 5 o'clock, and I want to honor people's time boundaries because you all have other things to do. But thank you for spending this hour with Jonathan as he shared himself with us. So if we can give him one more round of applause before we say goodbye to each other.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. And this recording will be available probably sometime next week. So share it with your friends once it's available. Okay. Have a good evening, all.